started. So my name is Logan Andrews, and I am a clinical child psychologist at Nationwide Children's Hospital. I'm really excited to chat with you all today about this important topic. So I'm going to be talking with you guys about screen time generally, but then also social media. So I know that Haidt in his book talks about these issues, and I feel like kind of from a macro level, right? Like he's a social psychologist, and so he's kind of viewing these issues broadly. But today I kind of want to zoom in and look at these issues from a micro level. So how do we handle these issues in your homes with your kiddos? And then also, I'm going to be sharing some of what I know with you guys today, but please feel free to chime in and share your own experiences. I'd love to hear how this looks in your guys' homes. And then the last thing I want to say here is that we could spend a lot of time talking about any one of these issues today, but we're just going to kind of broadly go over, right? We have about 30 minutes, and so I thought about what were the key takeaways that I wanted you guys to have, and really that is, what are some strategies that I can take home that will help us to prepare for social media, but then also how to navigate it when it's here. Okay, so some objectives, just to understand why it's so difficult to end screen time, talk about strategies to prepare for social media, again, also strategies for managing social media, and then to review some helpful resources. So this is the first thing that I want to say. So many of us in the group, it's my understanding that we have younger kids. Is it like kindergarten, first, second, third grade? Do we have older kids than that? Fifth, sixth? Okay. So a lot of you guys might be preparing for social media. Some of you guys might have it in your homes. Your kids might be using it already, and that's totally fine. But it can feel very scary. I mean, especially as we kind of work through the book and we learn about the possible outcomes of excessive social media use. So it can be a little scary as it gets closer if we're not already there. But I hope that you guys leave today having a few strategies in your back pocket that help us to feel a little bit more confident moving forward. So let's chat about why it's so hard to unplug. So essentially, we have what's called a variable reinforcement system. And within a variable reinforcement system, we have a participant, a child, who is receiving reinforcement at a variable frequency. So if you think about you're on TikTok, let's just take that for example, and your kiddo posts a video. It's like one of those dance videos or something, and they get a like. Okay, that's a hit of dopamine. And I think we're all probably familiar with dopamine at this point, a neurotransmitter that's associated with reward and reinforcement. So we get a couple likes, hit of dopamine. A couple minutes later, we get a couple comments, hit of dopamine. Or if you think about YouTube Shorts gets me, I'm not gonna lie. So it's hard to end the scrolling, right? It's because we see a video, it's interesting to us, hit a dopamine, reinforces that cycle, and we just continue on the, I don't know if you guys have heard of doom scrolling, or experienced it yourselves maybe. But this is essentially a variable reinforcement system, and one reason why it's so hard to unplug. This has also been called the slot machine effect. So if you can imagine, we're sitting at a slot machine, pull the lever, we see it go, maybe we hit big, maybe we don't, and then hopefully if we do, we walk away, but oftentimes we sit and we keep pulling that lever. It's the same thing when we're scrolling, right? So we might be getting those hits of dopamine here and there, and that keeps us coming back. So for kids, we have the variable reinforcement system, and then we have a developing self-control system. So the prefrontal cortex, or the front area of your brain, is not quite developed yet, right? So our kiddos are still developing executive functioning skills. And those skills include self-awareness, self-control. So when we have a variable reinforcement system and we combine it with developing self-control skills, we have a very difficult time putting down screens, ending the video game, putting down the phone. So one thing that I want us to understand is if our child has a difficult time putting down the video game or the phone, this isn't necessarily an indication that there's something wrong, like we have an addiction or there's something wrong with our kiddo. It's an outcome of this equation. Now that doesn't mean that if we have behaviors when we end screen time that we don't intervene, but it is helpful to just kind of understand why it's so hard to unplug. And it's hard for us too, right? Like this variable reinforcement system does not just work for kids, it works for adults too. Which is why, again, it's hard for most people to put down the phone. Okay, so some general screen time recommendations by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. For 2 to 5 year olds, for non-educational screen time, it's about an hour on weekdays and 3 hours on weekend days. And then for 6 to 15 year olds, less than 2 hours daily. And this is just screen time, so this isn't even social media. And I know that this can be challenging because even at school, a lot of the material is on the Chromebook, right? So we're doing a lot of work on screens already. So then we come home, maybe we watch some TV, we're on our phone a little bit, maybe we're doing video games, and that 2 hours can go pretty quick. And so I don't really have a perfect answer for this. We're going to talk a little bit about how can we set limits and what can we do at home. But these are the recommendations that are put forth by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about these pieces because you guys just read you're reading The Anxious Generation, and Haidt goes into detail about what does social media use look like and what are the possible outcomes. So again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but we know that about half of teenagers report spending at least 4 hours a day on screens. So this peaks around 15 and up, honestly. So for my dissertation, I looked at a middle school population, very similar. So these data, I think, apply to even younger populations. When we break down social media platforms, you can see that the most commonly used apps are YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. YouTube more often used by boys, TikTok by girls. I don't think the differences are major here, but these are the apps that are most commonly used. In my dissertation, which was just one school, they use WhatsApp a lot. Do you kids have WhatsApp? No? Yes? Okay. I didn't know what it was, but yeah. So I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. When I was doing my study, my advisor was like, my daughter has WhatsApp, maybe we should put that on the survey. And I'm like, okay. And then it was like one of the most commonly used platforms. But when we look at national data, it's YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
I'm surprised WhatsApp was listed as a social media platform. Me too.
Yeah. And it's like, so some of the apps, it's interesting because some people would view even Pinterest as like social media, right? It's kind of hard because obviously something like WhatsApp or Pinterest or something like that is different than something like Facebook and Instagram where you're posting pictures of your life or whatever. But then also it's different from YouTube because a lot of kids aren't necessarily making videos on YouTube, we're just scrolling. So social media platforms vary a lot. And I think that there's a lot of data that you could dive into there. But again, I always bring myself back to what are we going to do about it? Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here because Jonathon Haidt reviews all the possible psychological risks of excessive social media use. Now that's one thing that I want to point out is that, you know, these outcomes are more likely the more we use social media, right? So excessive social media use, not, you know, well, for example, the survey that found these risks, so victimization in person and cyber, persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and increased suicide risk. These were kids that said that they use social media at least several times a day. So again, when we're thinking about these risks, we want to remember that we're often talking about excessive use. We also know that social media use has been associated with depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. And there are gender differences. Again, I think there's actually a part in the book towards the end that talks about those gender differences in more detail. But again, for today's purpose, we'll talk about what we can do. So, when you think about your kiddo getting their license, I'm sure you're also kind of thinking about what are the limits that we're going to set around this, or what are the conversations going to look like. We're probably going to be talking about curfew. What time do we need to be home? Who can be in the car? How many passengers are we allowed to have? How fast can we go? Do we need to wear a seatbelt? What are we going to do about texting? Are there places where we are allowed to go versus we're not allowed to go? We're going to be having these conversations with kiddos. We're not just going to be throwing them the keys and saying, peace out. We're going to be having these conversations. It's going to be developmental. It's not just like the floodgates are open and we can do whatever we want with these keys. And I want you to think about getting social media in a very similar way. So we're not just going to hand a kiddo a smartphone and download TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all these different apps, and the floodgates, again, be opened to this online or this digital world. We're going to talk about what this is going to look like. And these conversations are going to look different for each family. There's just not a one-size-fits-all answer to any of these. So it's good to have these conversations with other parents. I think that's so important because you guys are all experiencing the same challenges, but also know that what works in one home might not work in your home. And that's going to be based off of your kiddos, your families, and your priorities and concerns. So social media, you might be thinking about time limits, algorithms, who are we allowed to follow and who's allowed to follow us on those platforms, inappropriate content, what are we going to do if we encounter this, maybe phone-free zones, and more. There are some, I think I listed some ideas or some examples on the handout that I gave you guys. We're going to get there. Those are not, these are just ideas, examples, because again, it's going to look different for every home. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about some interesting work out of Penn State. There's a group that studied how parents can get involved when it comes to social media and their kiddos. And so they referred to what's called active mediation, which can be thought of as reactive. So once our kids have social media, how do we engage with them about it? And some examples of this would be monitoring their engagement, talking with them about their behavior, and maybe even commenting on their posts, although some teens might not like that so much, some might not care. But this is another example they gave. The other factor that they talked about was parental or direct parental intervention, and this can be thought of as more preventative. So before our kids get social media, before they download Instagram, looking at how can we prepare, essentially. So looking at privacy policies, utilizing software to block certain content, and helping to set up privacy settings. So think of active mediation as like this ongoing engagement, and then you can think of direct parental intervention as how do we prepare. Okay, so they identified 4 different groups that parents generally fall in. So unengaged parents, and they created these title names. Unengaged would be low direct intervention and low active mediation. So we're not really talking about social media or doing much to prepare. And then when our kiddos get social media, we're not maintaining that ongoing conversation. Counseling parents were identified as in setting up different settings to block certain content. But we are high in engagement. So when our kiddos have social media, asking them questions, engaging. Controlling, this was identified as low active mediation, high direct intervention, so kind of the opposite. So we set up we do a lot of work on the front end, but then when our kids get social media, the conversation seems to stop a bit. And then highly engaged parents, this was the group that you would want to fall in. So we have a lot of prep going into it, and then we have a lot of conversation following social media. And these authors said that active mediation really has an empowering effect, and it allows teens to actively engage with others online, experience some risk, and form some coping strategies for protecting themselves from harm. And this in particular made me think a little bit about Jonathon Haidt's ideas around risk and challenges and experiencing things that we need to figure out. Now, I think the issue with social media is that we have concern for what these authors would call severe risk behaviors. So this could be talking to somebody that we don't know, or it could be sending an inappropriate photo, something like that, which is why we still want to engage in these active mediation and direct parental intervention, but we can expect that there's going to be some bumps in the road, and our kiddos will have the tools, and you will have the tools to handle that. The authors also said that active mediation appears to afford teens more autonomy to take risks, but to also take corrective actions to mitigate the risks that they take. The key takeaway here is that we need a balance. We need a balance of prep going into social media, and then we also need to continue conversations when we have social media. So what can we do? The first thing I would encourage is just a little reflection, and this is not meant to make anyone feel bad, but just reflect on your own social media use and your own screen time habits. So think about how much time do you spend on your phone, how do you interact with others online, and then would you want your child to develop the same habits that you're modeling right now? And if the answer is no, maybe make some adjustments, and that is totally fine. Like I said earlier, I'm a sucker for the YouTube shorts, and then before you know it, it's 10 o'clock, and I need to get to bed, and I'm tired the next day. So everybody experiences this. The variable reinforcement system is real. Again, it impacts adults too. So the first thing I would do is just a little reflection, and then plan and learn. So start having these discussions. If there's another caregiver in the home, you can start having these conversations with your kiddos. If their friends have social media apps, what do they have? What would they be interested in getting? What are their concerns about it? Just opening up this conversation. And I am going to we're going to look at the American Academy of Pediatrics Family Media Plan together. It's a really great resource that I would encourage you guys to check out, but the next slide we'll look at that together. I would also encourage you to learn about platform controls prior to your kids setting up an account. I think that it can reduce or ease stress a little bit, because if we're trying to learn at the same pace of our kiddos, our kids learn a lot faster than we do when it comes to these apps. I think that is not a database statement, but that is anecdotal, I suppose. So learn about these controls prior to your kids setting up an account. So if you know they're interested in Instagram, figure out what do the controls look like. And then if you don't have an account, I would honestly recommend setting one up just so that you know how the app works. And I think that will make it easier to engage with your kid in conversation, but then also learn like what are the things that we need to kind of watch out for on this particular platform, because all the platforms are very different. You also want to start having these conversations with your kiddo, like I said, and your family. And the American Academy of Pediatrics also has a great resource for family conversation starters. They give really great examples of questions and language you can use. And again, these conversations are going to look a lot they're going to look different from family to family. And so check that resource out. I think I also have a slide on that. But check that resource out and see if there's any language in there that you could use with your kid. Okay, cool. So here's the family media plan. It's going to work. Okay, yeah. All right, so if you look this up, you can put your family name, put your family members, and include their ages. And then you will identify the priorities that you have, or that your family has. So this could be screen-free times, screen-free zones, using media together. There's all these different priorities that you could choose. Then once you choose them, the program will have you go through each of those priorities, and it will give you a reason, like why is this important and how could we implement it. And the program will take you through all of the priorities. If I move too slow here, I might just pop through to the next slide. But at the end, it gives you a plan. So it'll based off of the priorities that you chose. I think the plan can be a little bit overwhelming, but it's a good place to start, and it's a good resource to have. It gives you ideas, right? So you might get this plan with all these bullet points, and you might decide, okay, we're going to focus on these 3. But it takes all of your priorities and it puts them into actionable items and very straightforward steps that you can implement in your home. So I highly recommend that resource. Okay. We also want to set limits. So like I said earlier, this is not an all or nothing situation. As soon as your kid gets a smartphone, as soon as they download their first platform or whatever, that does not mean that the floodgates are opened and that we have no control. It just means that we're going to have to set some limits, and we're going to have to continue engaging in conversation with them. These are a few examples. Like I said, maybe none of these work for you, maybe a few would, but a few examples would be to download one app at a time. So again, we're not just going to hand them the phone and be like, okay, download whatever. We want to go one app at a time, because then we can learn about the app, and we can, assess, are we using it responsibly before we move forward with more platforms, if that's what you decide to do. We could also set time limits. So if you're thinking back to the screen time recommendations, and you're trying to adhere to that, you probably want to go pretty minimal here. This could look anything like 30 minutes a day, could look like an hour a day, could look like 2 hours a week, 1 hour a week. Figure out what this looks like for your kiddo and for your family. You could also identify some off-limits hours of the day. So you might decide that we're not going to do screen time before we go into school in the mornings. Or you might decide, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, we get up, we brush our teeth, we brush our hair, we can earn that 15 minutes of screen time before we go into school. So that's just an example of how that could look different for different families, different kiddos. You also might decide no screen time before bed, or identify off-limits activities. So places like dinner, homework, family events, or vacations. Also, no social media on the weekdays or weekends. Some families allow, like I said, it could be like 30 minutes a day on the weekdays, or you might say no social media during the school week, but on the weekends you can have 1 hour a day, or for the week. And then another idea is planned social media breaks. I kind of think of like a social media holiday. So if you decide that a week out of the month that we're just going to take a break, step away from social media, or even a month out of the year. Again, just figure out what this looks like for your family and figure out ways to build in those breaks from social media. Okay. We also want to continue to monitor. So we can identify some red flags, such as disrupted sleep. So if we're scrolling social media at night, or even, broadly thinking about screen time, video games, TV, things like that, if this is resulting in disrupted sleep, we know that we might need to intervene here. Also, if you see less interest or participation in those in-person activities, thinking about what Jonathon Haidt says even, right? We want to encourage these in-person activities, these play-based activities. If you notice mood concerns or limited in-person friendships or even negative online behaviors, these are a few red flags that might require a little bit more evaluation and maybe some intervention. Okay. Also, we want to continue to communicate. So we talked about this a bit with the active mediation piece. A few things that I wanted to touch on here. So I think one fear that a lot of parents have is, what do we do when our kiddos experience inappropriate content, violent content, unexpected content? And so I want you to think about, what do you want your child to do when they see this? Do you want them to come right to you? What are their options? What do you want them to do? And we can express those expectations to them. And then when they come to you and say that they saw this maybe scary thing, inappropriate thing, then we have to monitor our own reaction, right? So of course we want to show up in a way that helps them to feel comfortable coming to us, even though they might see something that is scary, uncomfortable, all those things. But monitor your own reaction. And then I also wanted to mention algorithms. So you don't have to be an expert to explain this or to talk about it. Generally, algorithms. So we know that if we like certain content, we're going to see more of it. If we are scrolling and we see a video and it grabs our attention, and we watch that entire video instead of scrolling to the next one until it's completed, we're going to see more of that content. So just kind of discussing algorithms. Again, you don't have to be an expert. Just kind of talk about, if you see this and we continue to like this kind of content, we're going to see more of it. So if that's content that we don't like, we don't want to continue to like it or interact with it. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics also mentions that having conversations early and often is preferable to planning and structuring one long talk. And again, that takes us back to the active mediation piece. We don't want to, again, structure one long talk. Like, we want this to be ongoing conversation. If our kiddos have questions, if we have questions, we want to engage with them and have these conversations over time, right? We want them to feel comfortable coming to us, because if they do come across something that is not good, we want to be able to help them through that. This was the conversation starter resource. Yeah, so just, you can Google American Academy of Pediatrics conversation starters and social media, and this will pop up. It's a really great resource. Like I said, there's examples of questions that you can ask your kids. It helps to generate ideas, because I think a lot of the times we're saying, like, engage in conversation with your kids and do X, Y, and Z. But to actually think about, what do we ask? Or when do we ask it? I think that can be the tricky part. And so it's kind of hard because, again, this might look different across families, but resources like this will help to generate ideas as to what are the questions that I want to ask, or what are the things that I'm most concerned about. Okay, and then I kind of want to wrap with this. It's not all bad. It's scary. It's a big world of unknown, but it's not all bad. So it is an opportunity, social media is an opportunity for connection with others, self-expression, and it can be a very motivating reward, even screen time in general. So if we need to help shape our kiddos' behavior in some way, so if we need them to follow instructions more often, or if we're trying to encourage some other behavior, typically screen time is a highly motivating reward. It's not the only reward out there, but if your child is interested in screen time, it can be a motivating reward. But I think above all, look at screen time and social media as an opportunity for teaching and connection with your kids, because these conversations can help set the stage for later hard conversations around sex, around alcohol, vaping, whatever it is. This can help set that foundation. So if we can get comfortable having conversations like this with our kids, then hopefully by the time we're talking about these other concerns, we can feel a little bit more comfortable. Okay, I just listed a few extra resources here. The Surgeon General released an advisory in 23 on social media and youth mental health. APA also released a health advisory. Boston Children's Hospital has a digital wellness center, or family digital wellness guide. And then most platforms have some kind of like family center or some kind of parent resource. So I want to include these up here because I feel like these are some of the most commonly used apps. But so if you know that your child's interested in any one of these platforms, you can start to kind of learn about it now, and also learn what is available to help with that direct parental intervention, right? So what are the privacy controls? What are the privacy policies? Things like that. Okay, I think I'm a little bit over, but